Okay, hi everyone. Somebody want to give me an indication that you can hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I think Fraser's just going to carry on letting people in. It looks like we've got a really healthy crowd coming in. So I will just start with a bit of a welcome and explanation of who we are while people are just kind of joining us in the lobby. So yeah, welcome to the third BAAL Language, Gender and Sexuality Special Interest Group seminar. It's great to see so many of you joining us, lots of familiar faces. I know a lot of you have been to all of these online seminars, so it's great to see you returning. I'm Jay Mackenzie, so I'm the Early Career and Postgraduate Research Coordinator for the Special Interest Group. And these events have also been co-organised by Fraser Heritage. You give everybody a wave, Fraser. And he's the SIG Secretary. So we are really excited to welcome our two speakers today. We have Aimee Bailey and Elvis Coimbra Gomez. And this session is going to be on the theme of investigating language, gender and sexuality in online discourse, which I know is a big interest to lots of people here. So I'd like to briefly mention who we are as a group. I think a lot of you probably know this now, but just in case we've got any new joiners. So the Language, Gender and Sexuality Special Interest Group is part of the larger organisation, BAAL, which is the British Association of Applied Linguistics. So we provide a forum for researchers to come together and explore issues that specifically relate to language, gender and sexuality from a range of different perspectives. So in usual times, we meet once a year face-to-face for a one-day conference. We haven't been able to do that this year. So this academic year, we've been trialling this online series while options for travel have been limited, and it's gone really great. It's been really fantastic to see lots of people speak from around the world and for us all to come together. So we do have a mailing list, and if you'd like to stay up to date with our activities, if you email me or alternatively Fraser, we can get you onto our mailing list. So in terms of this series, really we wanted to spotlight some of the fantastic work that's being done by postgraduate and early career researchers in this field, and particularly those researchers who are focusing on marginalised or minority groups and or who are doing intersectional research. So that's kind of the rationale for this series. So I think that's all the kind of housekeeping. You've seen, I think, that the notes I put up for anyone who wasn't here. The session is being recorded. Please keep your microphones off and your videos off while we're doing the talks. But then at the end of each talk, we'll have a Q&A, which Fraser is going to field.
And before I forget, after the two talks, we'll have a short 15-minute break, and then we're going to have the SIG's annual general meeting, the AGM, which we're hoping will only last about half an hour or so. So please do feel free to stay on, have a talk about how you think, the direction of which you'd like to see the SIG go, and maybe even nominate yourself for a committee role.
Yes, brilliant. Thanks, Fraser. OK, so I'm going to introduce our first speaker. This is Aimee Bailey. She's a lecturer in English language at De Montfort University. So Aimee recently completed her PhD at the University of Nottingham. And this PhD examined how queer women's identities are discursively constructed in contemporary online contexts. So Aimee's interests are broadly in the area of sociolinguistics. She's especially interested in the areas of language, gender and sexuality, corpus linguistics, critical discourse analysis, multimodality and digital communication. So Aimee, I will hand over to you.
Great, thanks, Jay. Can everyone see my slides okay?
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, great. All right, so thanks for the introduction, Jay. So I'll just jump right in then. So my talk is titled, What's a Chick in a Hetero Relationship Doing Here? The Representation of Bisexuality in a Queer Women's Online Advice Column. The term queer women in this context refers to all women who are not straight, so this includes lesbian, bisexual and pansexual women. So here's an outline of what the next 20 minutes will look like. I'm going to start by discussing some previous research on language, gender and bisexuality, focusing on how bisexual women are represented in queer women's spaces. Then I'll talk about normativities and one particular theory of normativity, which is the lesbian normal. After that, I'll outline the data used in the study and the methods I've used to explore it. This will be followed by some close analysis of the advice column in question, ending with some overall conclusions. So I'm interested in the role of language in queer women's identity construction. Studies in this area have predominantly focused on lesbian identities, though a small number have also considered bisexual women's identities. And these studies have found that bisexual inclusion in queer spaces is a contentious topic, and they note the presence of marginalising and often biphobic discourses. These discourses are based on long-standing stereotypes about bisexuality. So, for example, the idea that bisexuals are confused about their identities, that they're promiscuous or unable to maintain monogamous relationships. This clearly links to the concept of normativity. Normativity is a central concept in language, gender and sexuality research, referring to the practice of privileging certain sexual and/or gendered identities. I take inspiration from Hall, Levon and Milani, who argue for the need to avoid overly simplistic dichotomies between what is normative and what is anti-normative, and instead to illustrate the various strategies individuals adopt to negotiate multiple dynamic, overlapping and at times contradictory normativities. So for me, part of this involves recognising that normativity can take many different forms, and what's normative in one place isn't necessarily what's normative in another. What's normative for a gay man isn't necessarily what's normative for a gay woman. I'm particularly interested in how gendered and sexual normativities intersect. One way of capturing this is the lesbian normal. This concept has been recently theorised by the sociologists Kate McNicholas-Smith and Imogen Tyler in relation to television. It marks the intersection of two forms of normativity, homonormativity and postfeminism. Really simply, homonormativity refers to the privileging of homosexuality over other marginalised sexualities, or it could be the privileging of certain forms of homosexuality, such as the lipstick lesbian. Postfeminism refers more to the way that women are positioned and the shift towards neoliberal models of subjecthood, which are characterised by individualism, consumerism, and seemingly contradictory values. The lesbian normal is depoliticising, so it sees feminist and queer struggles as kind of done, dusted, we're all equal now. It also resecures privileges for those who were the most privileged in the first place, so for example, middle-class white women. To explore lesbian normativity in more detail, I collected data from websites aimed at queer women. This forms the 2 million word Queer Women's Advice Corpus, or QAC for short, which has been collected from the advice sections of autostraddle.com and AfterEllen.com. These are articles published between 2010 and 2017. The corpus consists of over 700 articles with just under 15,000 below the line comments. These are the short messages that users can leave at the end of online articles. The analysis I'm going to present shortly stems from this larger project, which was my PhD project. Today I just want to focus on the data from AfterEllen. AfterEllen is an American entertainment and lifestyle website which describes itself as the largest and most comprehensive website dedicated to the representation of lesbian/bi women in popular culture. And I've highlighted lesbian/bi women because this is a description that occurs multiple times in the website's mission statement. AfterEllen has been around for a long time. It was founded in 2002 by Sarah Warne. Since then, it has changed hands a few times and it has been the subject of controversy in recent years. In 2018, it was criticised for its anti-trans shift, which prompted other LGBTQ websites, including Autostraddle, which is the other website in my corpus, to sign an open letter in support of the trans community. But my study kind of focuses on the period before this happened, kind of the old AfterEllen, if you will. Just thought it was important to point that out. More specifically, I want to focus today on one particular advice column, the Hookup or the HU. It was a regular sex and relationships column on AfterEllen. The Hookup was selected for close analysis due to the fact that it's by far the most frequent column in the Quack. It accounts for over 160 articles and nearly 300,000 words over a 6-year period, and so therefore it can be considered quite a significant part of the corpus. The Hookup follows the traditional question and answer format of advice columns, which you might also know as kind of agony aunt columns, in which a reader's letter poses a problem and the columnist's reply offers guidance. The writer of the column is Anna Pulley, who you see pictured here. This is the banner that features at the top of each edition of the column. Pulley is a queer woman and frequently discusses her own identity and experiences of dating women and men in the column. So to analyse the column, I am taking a predominantly qualitative approach. The wider project involves corpus linguistic analysis, so inevitably several corpus linguistic techniques have kind of crept in here, but today I'll only be showing the frequencies of comparative terms. Central to my analysis is Buchholz and Hall's tactics of intersubjectivity framework, which is based on the idea that identities are inherently relational, never autonomous or independent, but always acquire meaning in relation to other available identity positions and social actors. The framework consists of 3 pairs of tactics for constructing identities. These are adequation and distinction, which refer to the degree to which identity is presented as being similar or different. Authentication and denaturalization, which refer to the degree they're presented as being real or fake. Authorization and illegitimation refer to the degree to which they are presented as valid or invalid. So, let's begin by looking at the frequency of the term bisexual in the data. This table shows a comparison between the term bisexual and other identity labels in both the overall corpus, the Quack, and the subcorpus, the HU. We can see from this table that the patterns are quite similar, that bisexuality is marginal compared to other labels in both contexts. Lesbian, gay, queer and straight are between 66% and 204% more frequent than other labels in both contexts. The fact that straight is more frequent is interesting because, as we just saw, bisexual women are part of AfterEllen's target demographic, whereas straight women aren't. This suggests that sexuality is most frequently discussed in binary terms in the corpus. However, a different pattern can be observed when we look at the column's subtitles. Of the 119 edition of the column with descriptive subtitles, so the rest are only marked by date, bisexuality is referenced 9 times in titles such as Bisexual Conundrums, Bisexual Monogamy Edition, Confused Bisexuals Edition. And this can be compared to the lower frequencies of the other terms in this context. As the subtitles offer a selective summary of the problems discussed, this attests to the problematic status of bisexuality in the column. For example, the subtitle, "I'm bi, but is it easier to come out as gay?" reflects readers' reluctance to admit being bisexual, implying there's a negative association with the category. And this is a theme which occurs multiple times in the corpus. Choice to foreground bisexuality in subtitles could also relate to the identity of the columnist. Anna Pulley discusses her own identification in some of her responses. So, for example, in extract 1, she writes, "I like to identify as a political bisexual whose heart is gay, but whose vagina is less picky at times. If that takes too long to say, then I'll often opt for queer." So, rather than simply aligning herself with a label, she presents her sexuality in a more complex way. She elaborates on her bisexuality through the pre-modifier political and through relative clauses that create a disjuncture between romantic and sexual attraction. This is explained through the personification of body parts. While she's attracted to women, she's only attracted to men sexually at times. By attributing this attraction to her body parts rather than to herself, it presents it as being beyond her conscious control. In extract 2, Pulley presents her sexuality differently, explaining its fluidity across time. She writes, "For me, I was straight until I was 20, and then I was like US gay, until I got dumped by my first girlfriend. Then I became bi. then gay again, then super gay, with a few accidents, then bi again, and now I'm only straight while I'm intoxicated. This is a response to a young reader who is having an identity crisis. Polly's identity in this extract shifts 7 times. She fluctuates between variations of gay, straight, and bi. And on one hand, this could serve to reassure the reader that identity labels don't really matter, and they can change. However, I argue that the instability of bisexuality in this extract reflects its problematic nature. There is a complex interplay of intentional and unintentional bisexuality, but it's notable that only relations with men are unintentional, a few accidents, and the result of being drunk. This again presents them as happening beyond her conscious control. Relationships with women, in contrast, are emphasised through the use of relationship terms, first girlfriend, and enthusiastic metaphors like US gay. The fact that bisexuality is not as readily accepted in Polly's construction of her sexual identity is unsurprising given the negative stereotypes associated with bisexuality in the column and in the corpus generally. The bisexual monogamy edition of the column is one example of this. It features a letter from a reader who uses the pseudonym Slightly Crazy Lady. Her problem is outlined in extract 3. I'm a bi girl in a hetero relationship with an amazing guy. I don't have queer friends, and honestly I have 2 concerns with trying to meet people from the community. 1, biphobia. What's a chick in a hetero relationship doing here? 2, if I'm accepted by people and make new friends, I'm not sure I trust myself to be good. That is to stay 100% faithful to my dear loving boyfriend. The construction of this problem clearly reflects bi-negative stereotypes of greed and untrustworthiness. This is emphasised in the title, where the choice to pre-modify monogamy with bisexual marks it as being an issue of sexuality, not of relationships in broader terms. The opening of the letter foregrounds the issue of identity, as sexual identity descriptors are attributed both to the reader as a bi girl and her relationship, a hetero relationship. The use of hetero therefore performs an emphatic function in the context, drawing a direct contrast between personal identity and relational identity. This has a denaturalizing effect which would not be produced had the term hetero been omitted or had a term such as opposite sex been used instead. It therefore supports the distinction between the concepts of bisexuality and monogamy. Because of this, the reader questions her right to belong in the queer community, integrating the imagined voice of a community member. Biphobia is explicitly linked to her relationship type. Again, the term hetero relationship is used. This suggests that in choosing to form a relationship with a man, she's potentially forsaken her right to claim community membership. The second point relates more explicitly to the title, as she questions her ability to stay faithful. The pre-modification of boyfriend emphasises his positive attributes, he's dear and loving, and constructs him as being innocent. This is particularly marked in the corpus, as boyfriends are generally represented negatively. So the extract ultimately reaffirms a bi-negative stereotype. The right to belong in the queer community is also questioned in other readers' letters. Extract 4 is a response to a reader who has always dated women but has recently started to date a man. She asks whether she'll have to give up her queer card if she takes the relationship further. Polly's response reads, "Yes, hand over your queer card right this instant, young lady, and your degree in theatre tech, and all those Lowe's gift cards I know you have. It's Straitsville from here on out, so you best don some Lululemon yoga pants and invest in a good casserole dish, because this is your life now." Just kidding, that's actually a pretty accurate description of my life, and I live in the good old US of gay. So the metaphor of the queer card is extended in the reply, forming an imaginary where Polly is an authority figure confiscating an official document. She uses the tactic of illegitimation, ironically here. Sexual identities are constructed through the metaphor of place. The town metaphor Straitsville imagines heterosexuality as a regional identity with distinct characteristics. The metonym of the casserole dish reflects small town, tight-knit community values, perhaps implying that the reader must now take on a housewife role as a result of her new identity. The small isolated nature of this location is emphasised through its contrast with the country metaphor, the good old US of gay. This negative imaginary implies that heterosexual people are a minority and a gay majority, reversing reality. In the final line, the imaginary is negated and the reader is authorised to claim a queer identity. This extract reflects a wider pattern in the column of Pulley constructing these elaborate imaginaries, which are ultimately then negated. However, these imaginaries construct stereotypical ideas and binary distinctions are brought into being. In most cases, though, the negative imaginaries take up far more space than the actual advice. In summary, then, lesbian identity is normative in the hookup column, and this is shown both in terms of the quantity and quality of its representation. Where bisexuality is focused on is often framed in terms of problems. This often includes navigating bi-negative stereotypes, which are found to still be pervasive. Queer women's opposite-sex relationships are sometimes discussed, which perhaps signals progress, but notably they're only really discussed, at least in a positive or neutral way, within the context of biphobia. While bi-negative stereotypes are often dismissed and challenged, ultimately, there is a lack of positive representation to counter them, which I argue ultimately leaves a representational vacuum. So more needs to be done to create positive images of bisexuality in queer women's online media. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you, Amy. There's lots of applause going on. Okay, I think Fraser's going to field the Q&A.
Yes, so thank you for that wonderful talk, Amy. If anyone has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand and I will get to it. So this is the really awkward bit where everyone's thinking what to type.
You know I've got a question, Fraser, so...
Well, I'll tell you what, would you like to start us off, Jay?
I can start us off, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll ask my question anyway. So yeah, thank you, Amy. It's really great to see some kind of sociolinguistic work on bisexuality. As you know, it's quite lacking. So yeah, my question, I was reading the third extract about bisexual monogamy. I don't even know if this is a question. Anyway, just something I noticed, the one about bisexual monogamy, and I just noticed something that I'd kind of seen before that you did sort of touch on, that she sort of emphasises what an amazing guy her boyfriend is. And I wondered if you'd seen that before, because I've seen that before as well. And it seems to be maybe a part of that sort of mitigation. It's kind of, I'm in a relationship with a guy, but he's an amazing guy. And I wondered if that was kind of part of that mitigation strategy, and also kind of, like you said, answering back to kind of other kind of representations of men and kind of perceived kind of biphobia in the community. Yeah,
definitely. That's a really interesting point. I think generally in the corpus, you don't see these kind of positive representations of relationships with men. So men are often discussed as, you know, kind of like high school relationships, or before I came out, I was in a relationship with a guy and it was pretty rubbish, that kind of thing. Is generally what you see, or you see them as like, I fancy this girl and she's got a boyfriend, and how annoying is that? So generally this stands out to me, which is why, yeah, it's about these positive representations of boyfriends only occur in this context of talking about biphobia. It's like, I think it does perform a kind of mitigating function in terms of the discourse context, where boyfriends aren't represented that well. So it's like, yeah, he is a really great guy. But yeah, it does stand out. It feels like, yeah, they're only allowed to be discussed positively when it's in the context of biphobia.
Yeah, thanks, Amy.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, we've got quite a few questions coming up in the chat. If you want to read if you want to unmute your microphone and say it, or if you want me to read it, just let me know. Dorothea, if you want to go first. I'm happy to read it out if you, unless you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I found your talk really, really interesting, and I'm wondering if you feel that there has been a shift in the representation of bisexuality since when you collected the corpus.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, in terms of AfterEllen, I would say there's been more of a kind of regressive shift, because as I mentioned, there has been a kind of change of ownership on AfterEllen, and it's now owned by a company called Lesbian Nation. And part of, well, apart from transphobia, part of the thing is kind of really emphasizing the boundaries of lesbian identity. So I feel like actually, yeah, there probably is a shift on AfterEllen. I haven't actually studied it properly since collecting my corpus. But I feel like, yeah, probably there's a shift towards more lesbian normativity than there was before, because I feel like the boundaries have become more solid in that sense.
Lovely, thank you. Albert, again, same if you'd like to either unmute yourself or I can read it out for you.
No, that's fine. Hello. Sorry, the camera's not working at the minute. Thank you very much for that very interesting talk. The question I always have with research like that, with such a big influence or like a big description of society, as you will, is what motivated you to go into that direction and find out more about that issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this, as I mentioned, this stems from my PhD project, which was a kind of corpus linguistic investigation of queer women's online media, more generally, and the kind of, well, I guess what motivated me to study that in the first place is the fact that I'm a queer woman. I noticed that mainly this area has been studied in relation to print media, and we don't know as much about the kind of online context, which is the context that I kind of, you know, have grown up with. But in terms of bisexuality, that kind of came from the data. So I was doing some corpus linguistic sort of investigation of the data, and that kind of stood out as being a key theme. And I know, yeah, from experience that bisexuality can be marginalised in queer spaces, and I kind of wanted to find out more about it.
Yeah, I find that super interesting. And this thing you said also about transphobia, I feel like is a big thing. I'm from Germany, and I have a couple of friends in the lesbian community, and there's this big like nationwide event, and they've literally cut any reference to any sort of trans identity in that event, which is something that resonates with what you have found in your research, this normativity around what it means to be a lesbian.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. And slightly disconcerting that, you know, they had to cut the references.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that question. Laura, up to you again.
Hello, Amy. Thank
Hi.
you. That was fab as always. Yeah, I mean it's just what I said in the chat really. Do you think that some of those kind of negative imaginaries reflect the kind of slippery slope discourse that we've seen in discussions around other kind of, you know, like kind of gay rights movements and that kind of thing? Do you think that there's a kind of similar sort of discursive strategy going on here? I really like, I love the focus that you have this on the can't even say the words, no, you know, like normative lesbian, you know, the idea of the normal lesbian and all of that. I think that's really, really fascinating. And I just wondered if you thought that there was a discursive link there between other research that's been done in similar areas. It's a really inarticulate way of asking the questions.
No, that's a really good point, and it's really interesting. It's something I hadn't really thought about, was kind of these links to other discourses. In terms of slippery slope stuff, I think it is really interesting because, yeah, I think maybe the negative imaginaries kind of serve as a bit of a warning of like, yeah, this is what could happen.
Yes.
You don't kind of embrace this community.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I thought that example that you gave with the casserole dish, that was a really funny one. That just really resonated with me, and I just like, how prevalent is that kind of thing in your corpus, do you think?
Well, in terms of this column, it's a really common strategy. Anna Pulley does this a lot, is creating these imaginaries, which are just really kind of reinforcing binaries, like really, really stereotypical. And then at the end, there'll be like a final line saying, actually, just kidding, didn't mean that, it's all fine, you know, you're a community member. And it's actually really confusing. And I think for young people who maybe take to the internet for advice about identity, you know, they're just kind of coming to terms with it, that could be really confusing for them.
Absolutely.
I think if you miss the last line, then you just take it for
just because you've negated it, I mean, you've already said it, so it doesn't take it away, does it? You know. It's almost, it's foregrounded, isn't it? Anyway, yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. I'll shut up now.
Thank you so much, Laura. Okay, so the next question is about corpus software, and that comes from Kate.
Okay, cool. So I used Sketch Engine for my analysis, and I used this because, well, mainly I also had a lot of experience of using it in my MA. But also I wanted to have access to a particular corpus on there for keyword analysis. I don't know how familiar people are with keyword analysis. Basically just a kind of comparison corpus, which is, the corpus is called English Web 2015 or 13. There's 2 versions of it. So that is like billions of words from the internet, which I thought would be a good comparison with my data, because it's all online data. So that was really the reason for using Sketch Engine.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. And we really only have time for about one more question. So unless you want to answer the other ones in the chat afterwards while Elsie's talk goes on at the very end, that might help. So the final question really we can take comes from Linda. So Linda, would you like to unmute yourself and speak, or would you like me to ask it for you?
Hi Amy, it's not actually a question, it's just a comment that it really does resonate, your talk, with what I've found in my own research. I'm going to sound like the worst student imaginable, but I'd started collecting data from quite a big organisation that's dedicated to South Asian. It's an LGBTQ community. And my comment is just that it surprised me naively. I thought that I would find a much more egalitarian organisation. And it came as a shock to learn that the women in particular were finding that men were dominating the space.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. That's something that is kind of really central to my project, is looking at how kind of hierarchies are created in groups which are, you know, on a mainstream level, they're marginalized, but then they create their own kind of normativities and hierarchies. I think perhaps, you know, that's part of being discriminated against in wider society. Perhaps you create more specific boundaries around your own identities. But yeah, it is really interesting.
Yeah, you've given me the enthusiasm